This is the Innovation Forum.
Welcome to the Innovation Forum. I'm Chris Kohler. Thanks very much for your company this evening. Tonight, we're at the cusp of a new era of business reinvention. From artificial intelligence to automation and cloud computing, the new reality facing businesses is offering great opportunity to renew and change. Joining me as we explore what is happening now, what lies ahead, and the best way for businesses to navigate a successful way forward are Doug Robinson, Managing Partner, Global Business Service at IBM ANZ, Rita Dar, National Head of Emerging Industries at Westpac's Business Bank, the ANZ Regional Director for Cloud Protection and Licensing Activity at Thales, Graham Piper, and from Telstra, the General Manager of Threat and Intelligence, Chris Moen. Thank you very much for all being here with me. We're looking forward to the chat. But first, before we do, here's what we know so far when it comes to businesses positioning themselves to move forward with confidence and reap the potential rewards.
Change. It happens fast these days, and for businesses operating in the modern world, it's a never-ending race to keep up. That's a tough ask when the competition is so fierce. Only this week, Facebook announced its cryptocurrency Libra will capitalise on blockchain technology. At the same time, NAB has announced that it will invest $2 billion over 5 years to help emerging companies build and grow their businesses. At the IBM Think Summit in Sydney, reimagining what the future looks like for Australian enterprises was right at the heart of their discussion.
I think the future's never been brighter. And we look at all the industrial revolutions that we've witnessed, and this is truly one of those eras that is going to define who we are for the next several decades.
IBM is positioning itself as an enabler of the digital reinvention, helping businesses on their journey as they adapt and change.
We are very, very enthused and bullish about the future because we look at this as being a unique opportunity for enterprises to really reimagine the way work's going to get done moving forward. And it's possible due to the convergence of the cloud, of all the data. We've had more data than we've ever had. And then you combine it with AI, blockchain, and all these exponential technologies. So that's really the game changer. How do you use the technology to truly enable and, in the end, create that business outcome? To do that, it's going to involve modernizing your applications, the enterprise applications, and that's something that's going to receive a lot of focus. But the good news is, with all that effort, we're going to see tremendous breakthrough opportunities for enterprises to have a flexible architecture so they can do a lot more.
From IBM's perspective, Australia already has some major success stories.
And the Westpacs, the Eubanks, the Woodsides, there's lots of fine examples here in Australia. I talk about natural resources, and then in the banking, Westpac's a great example. Look what they've done with Red. Locally, they've rolled it out to almost 5 million of their customers in the retail. And again, they're challenging status quo, and they're reimagining the way work is going to get done. One thing I think Australia has to continue to embrace is the rate and pace and the speed. And ultimately, what that means is scale. And I do see, and I don't look at it as a negative, I look at it as an opportunity for some of these organizations and enterprises in Australia to go faster and accelerate. And if they can do that, I think it's going to help their competitiveness moving forward.
Ultimately, progress and change is not achieved without risk. Managing data and guarding privacy are huge concerns for businesses and their customers.
We all have a responsibility, not just IBM, our competitors included, to have the opportunity to work together with academia, with government, to make sure that we're responsibly ushering in this next era of technology, because it's exciting and there's just so much opportunity. But with that, again, we have to be stewards of society and make sure we do it responsibly. We've got AI, we've got blockchain, and the other one is data. Data is gold. And being able to use data, it's the engine, or I should say the fuel to the AI engine, and that's what really, where the magic happens, is to bring it to life. Because once you have the data, you create insight. Insight creates knowledge. Then you can go back to your business processes like supply chain and finance and reimagine.
And when it comes to reimagining the future, almost anything is possible.
Well, that all sounds absolutely terrific. We're going to dig into some of the things that raised now. Look, Doug Robinson from IBM, I want to start with you here. When we talk about business reinvention, what do we really mean? Are we talking about AI? Are we talking about blockchain? If we are, what exactly are those things? That's a big question to open things up.
I think when you look at the tools that are emerging and the technology that's changing, it's allowing reinvention. Not only like we're seeing industry reinvention, we're seeing Uber, changing in taxi industry. We're seeing business model reinvention where people are just going to business in a totally different way. We're seeing process reinvention. So we're seeing a lot of different types of reinvention, but it's being enabled by the new tools that are coming through. So blockchain is a development tool. Originally, came around from cryptocurrency, but we looked at it and said, what else can it be used for? So if you think about some of the examples of where you can change industries, we looked at business problems. So we went to the shipping industry, the container industry, and we found that in the shipping industry, paperwork that goes with a container shipment costs about 40% of the total cost.
Wow.
Paper. And is carried with the ship.
Oh my God.
And we looked at it and we said, who supplies the paper? And there's 43 people that supplied paper into it. So it was the shippers themselves. It was the commercial invoices, the fumigation certificates, the customs documents, and they all travel with it. And we looked at it and we said, well, blockchain is actually a really good solution for this. So blockchain is a technology that allows a community to share documents or interactions, and in this case, documents, into a pool. The individual users of the contributors in the community can see different parts. So the customs might be able to see this part. But what it allows you to do is to have efficiency gains in an industry like that, where documents and information are shared in a secure way that only the privileges of the different users, they see what they are supposed to see, to enable an industry change. So, if you think about the impact on the shipping industry change like that, it's actually quite large when you look at the cost and efficiencies. So that's one example. You mentioned AI, and I think the interesting thing I'm experiencing is as these tools come out, and we go back to our labs and to our customers, every 6 months we're seeing a new solution. Like people are just using them to reinvent businesses. And cognitive shopping is an interesting one, and it was something that was done in Korea with one of our Korean clients. And their experience they wanted to provide is on your mobile phone. If you were shopping for a present, you could say, I'm looking for a present for my wife. That asks some information about, what are you looking for? It takes the information. So this is spoken interface, which is part of the AI components. It then goes out to external sources, Pinterest, Facebook. What's popular? So, I've asked for a bracelet. It comes back with these type of things. So it starts narrowing in the shopping experience. You still might be in the store, and you go, I like that. It gives you a map to where it is. So you can, people are thinking, how to use these tools to reinvent some of the experiences we have today, but just to experience them in a different way.
Oh, absolutely. That's some of the best explanation of some complicated topics that I've ever heard. So I'm far closer to understanding what blockchain and AI are than I ever have been before. Graham, might be a good point to bring you in here because you're an expert on cloud computing. What exactly is the cloud? I mean, I've got some people from Sky News Weather in the other room jumping up and down as they hear this. But of course, we're talking about cloud technology and computing. What is it? How does it work?
So I think, Chris, in the simplest form, it is effectively a network of computers that is attached to the internet. Okay, if you look up that on Wikipedia, I think that's pretty much a verbose, accurate perspective of what I've just explained. But if you then look at what that's actually allowing organizations to do, we've moved away from having a computer basically on our own premise. We're now looking at how can we leverage and how can we get away from having stuff that we actually physically own, but rent it, okay? So how can we consume that kind of technology without actually having to have a big upfront outlay in terms of cash and so on? But also, we might not necessarily want to use something continuously. You might, software developers, example, you might only want to use something for a very small period of time. And in that small period of time, it's great for being able to run something up in a cloud environment, test it, bring it back down, And you're not actually having to pay for all of the licenses, the servers, the infrastructure, and everything else. So from that perspective, it's very, very good. I guess from a consumer perspective, and Chris and I were talking about this earlier on, was the GoPro. I think the GoPro really changed our perception of the cloud. You take a photo with a GoPro, it's instantly in your cloud account, right? And you can then share that with people around the world. So from that perspective, it's really opening the doors to areas that we've never really had open to us before. You know, you have to go and develop a film. You know, you've now got your phone, you can snap it, it's shared. You know, we live in a very open society like that now.
It's incredible. It's such a huge development that I'm sure touches so many businesses, particularly as they're starting out. Rita, I want to talk to you now because as the head of emerging industries at Westpac's Business Bank, you deal with a lot of emerging businesses, I would imagine. So what exactly are you seeing? Are you seeing these technologies being taken up at a huge rate?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Within emerging industries, we focus on two areas. We look at the emerging digital economy and the emerging low-carbon economy. And what we're really seeing in both those areas really are businesses taking new and emerging, but also very mature technologies and applying it to solve age-old customer problems and societal problems that we've been living with in new and innovative ways. You know, as end consumers, you know, referring to some of the examples you've given, we see new experiences, we see new products and services. And what we see as bankers also is fundamentally new business models with a very different set of financial configuration than what we are used to seeing in I guess, with traditional small businesses and traditional mid-market corporates. So I guess, you know, it's interesting, and it's a change that's happening across all the industries. When we do talk to businesses in these and founders in these kind of areas, it's interesting, our conversation never quite leads with the technology. It always leads with the customer. Who is the customer? What is their problem that you're trying to solve, you know? And then it becomes about, you know, how are you solving their problem? What is your value proposition? And this is where you start seeing technology then factor into the conversation. It then moves into, well, how are you reaching the customers? And that's where you start looking at some of the more online channels and things like digital marketing, etc. And then we are bankers, so obviously we kind of have a conversation on how does this create value. And the value is both in economic terms, but also for the broader society as well. And so that's where you kind of see technology weaving into the conversation. It's never really the be-all and end-all. It is a tool to enable these businesses to solve these problems in new ways that really, you know, takes us to the next level of customer experience and convenience. So from our perspective, you know, I guess that's what sets these businesses apart, really.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that the businesses, kind of, their problems remain the same, and the technology really just serves to
sometimes,
kind of
you know, we tend to apply technology and create new problems. So
well, there is also that, of course. Hey, Chris Moen, I haven't forgotten about you over there. Thank you for your patience. Look, of course, from your experience with Telstra, we're talking about reinventing businesses. Do you think it's the right approach for everybody? I mean, there are a lot of people and businesses out there who are probably a bit reluctant and struggle to keep up with the times, but do you think it is an adapt or die environment we're in now?
Listening to what Doug and Rita have said and Graham, we've changed the world, and the world's rapidly advancing. Plumbers need to be 24/7 connected because we have problems 24/7. Doug's shipping piece there, you can't stop. So small businesses now, it doesn't matter if it is the fish and chip shop or it is an IBM, needs to be connected. And that's the whole conversation that we've moved into. We need to make sure that everybody can do what the big businesses can do as a small business. Same thing. There's no real difference between the two.
I agree. I totally love the shipping example as well, and a couple of the other ones too. Doug, I'm wondering if through IBM there are some other examples of you know, reinvention done particularly well that you might be able to share with us.
Yeah, I think, you know, you look at some of the emerging technologies again, and video to data is interesting, is what we're seeing. And I'll go to an airline example, is you know, when you're looking at an airline departure, as you pull away from a gate, you're looking at a departure sequence, right? So is the catering truck been there? Is the fuel been there? Is the water been there? Is the tug ready? That was a process that had kind of intervention and feedback that was in it. Now we're actually using video to recognize a tug, to recognize a catering truck, and it can actually provide information back to a control tower that this has actually happened. And so you can just imagine the type of things as you take that video example out. So, and this is kind of the video and the AI. If I put it on a pick face in a warehouse where I'm doing picking, can I understand stockouts? So it's things we've done before, but suddenly we're being more efficient just by using some of the tools that we can access on it.
Fascinating efficiency gain there for the airlines. Unbelievable. I'm looking forward to cheaper tickets already myself. Hey, Rita, listening to that, it's kind of hard to imagine that doesn't change the way people approach their businesses. Do you think that this development is changing the way we think and challenging perceptions?
So the application of technology, I guess.
Yes.
Well, absolutely, it is right. We are definitely solving problems in different ways, and data is a good example. An application of data is actually a really good example of this. Probably when we all started our career, when we looked at designing customer experiences, the approach that used to be taken in this space used to be, stepping back, making, defining broad segments and making gross generalizations of what those segments are and what they need. And, what we are seeing happen now is, the ability to gain a very deep insight at an individual level and being able to personalize at that level. And, this is a good example of where, it's an evolving kind of space where how we are thinking about it is moving all the time, because it's a fine art. If you get the balance right, what you create is a fairly beautiful customer experience that, we all feel welcome in and, want to use, and it actually makes our life easier. But if you don't get it right, and, over the years we've seen examples of this, that's where, the experience moves from being a wonderful experience that's tailored to you to being something that is probably creeping on being creepy or even out of line. So looking at technology, looking at application of data, and how it's kind of creating and shaping our experience of the world, and what it makes us think and changes and how it shapes our expectations is an evolving, I think, beast in the market at the moment.
Absolutely, and we are going to talk a bit about the challenges that this sort of advancements that they bring along with it. But I also want to talk to you, Graham, about the idea of disruption and the AI and cloud computing, those sorts of things being disruptors. I mean, how do you kind of see that as a concept? I mean, we talk about it a lot, but I wonder if we actually really know what's going on out there.
I think if you look at all of those topics in their own right, you could probably have a show on each one, right? Where we see things that are really changing, I think, especially in the world of AI, we're looking at how you can now visually model a smart city, right? You can pick up a complete image of Sydney, for example, and you could say, okay, well, what would happen in this virtual model if I moved the M1 from where the M1 actually is and put it a little bit further to the south, right, or to the west? What would happen to the traffic flow? Would that have an impact? There's whole things that you can actually use within the AI kind of environment that gives you special insights and new insights that we didn't have before. And those insights are what are developing these new technologies further so that we can advance our own sort of understanding and abilities.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like getting on top of some of those technologies as a small company, you can become big very, very quickly. We see it a lot on the Australian markets when we talk about some of the most successful ones in the last few years, particularly in the tech and IT space. It makes me wonder, Rita, you would be looking at, when we talk about emerging businesses, I imagine that small business and startups are in that space. Do you see these sorts of technologies as removing barriers to entry?
Absolutely. I mean, to Graham's point, cloud is probably the best example of that. When you talk to founders and when you listen to podcasts about, very successful founders who started probably 10, 15 years ago, they will give this particular example. And the reason there is, one of the feedback we get is from founders, but also, partners of VC firms, is it's probably never been a better time. And because the cost of starting businesses has actually come down. And using, again, cloud as an example, back in the day, if you're starting a software business, you'd have to go and buy your own mainframes. I don't know, I think Doug could probably...
That'd be great.
probably be 10 grand outlay there and then. Whereas today, you don't have that upfront capital expenditure. And then, heaven behold, if you were successful, then you have to add your own servers. And not only that, then you have to worry about data security and, and all those kind of infrastructure you have to build around your business. And today, that cost doesn't exist. It can be rented. In fact, everything can be rented. It's not just storage and processing. It's talent and space. And then, very quickly you can get to a stage where you've kind of developed a prototype of an idea, you've tested it, and you've got a sense of whether this will work or not. So definitely, I guess these technologies have made it easier to start a new business.
Sure. Yeah. Doug, do you agree? I mean, we're talking about lean businesses. Presumably that means that they can be successful earlier.
Absolutely seeing that. And with the cloud technology, I think that it's changing the barrier to entry in industry change. And I think we're seeing the shortening of the disruption cycle, right? So you can disrupt an industry in as short as 3 years. I think the thing that we're seeing on the flip side of that is the incumbents going on the defense. So, the large incumbents that have been in industries for a long time are realizing, hey, I need to invest in this space too to try to get ahead of a disruption and be the disruptor. So I think there's an interesting dynamic of both more access and more challenge to the large areas of a more defensive posture.
Yeah, you see a bit of that, don't you? Absolutely. Now, look, with all of this positive, we have to at some point talk about the negative and the risks. Look, we'd be irresponsible if we didn't. Hey, so look, with all of this positive, of course, we've got to talk about data leaking, data privacy, security, information being at risk. What do you think? Are there serious disruptions to the disruption, if I could put it that way, Chris?
There is. One of the challenges we face is businesses are designed to focus on their core output. So if I'm a plumber or an airline or even a bank, I'm focusing on one area in particular. And if I'm a small startup, that's the first thing I do. I don't think about data security. I don't think about cloud storage. I don't think about where my videos are going and what happens next. So it's that change in mindset. The fun thing is, business is actually really good at risk. If you think of most small businesses in Australia, 94% of businesses in Australia are small businesses. They're actually excellent at understanding their supply chain risk. So what if my goods don't turn up? How do I deal with that one? But when they think it's the cloud, and the joke is that's someone else's computer, if they think their data's stored somewhere else, well, that's someone else's risk. No, that's yours. So bring it back to that, and it's something that you own. If you've got something in your shop, you know how to protect it. But when it's not as physical as noughts and ones, which is the information in the cloud, how do I look after that and what's the next steps? And it's working with each of those businesses to make them understand what's important. Because it's not just the physical goods anymore, it's the information about the customers and what they do.
Well, there probably are a fair few small and medium businesses watching this right now, and to have access to you all is extremely valuable. Graham, the Director for Cloud Protection, so how do these businesses better protect the information that they're gathering?
I think there isn't a single way to protect everything, right? What you've really got to start to do is to do the simple things first. And the way that I always look at stuff is if something comes with a default password, change it. Even if you can replace it with a strong, unique password, which is via SMS. You have a lot of social media these days who, when you want to reset your social media account, it actually sends you a text message to say, enter this code. And you use that as your verifier to allow you to make those changes. Other than that, you then got to really look at, okay, well, what is my appetite to risk? What happens if this piece of information actually leaves and gets into the wrong hands or into the hands of somebody that I don't want it to get into? And that information could be IPR information. We're a very large country where we survive a lot on mining, right? So we're doing a lot of geospatial data infrastructure into what's actually underneath the ground, so that we can actually go, okay, let's mine there. If that information fell into a competitor's hands, then that's billions of dollars of investment gone down the drain. So we need to be able to encrypt that information and protect it at the heart. That is everything. But when you encrypt information, it's not necessarily the fact that you've encrypted it. It's the fact that you then need to manage your encryption keys. So that is really at the crux of how do we protect information in the cloud.
Oh, it is the question, isn't it? And absolutely here on the Innovation Forum we are talking about the balancing of risk and opportunity, of course. We do have to go to a short break, but coming up, what lies ahead as businesses reinvent themselves. We look into what the future has in store. Don't go away.
The Innovation Forum, proudly brought to you by IBM. Let's put smart to work.
This program proudly supported by ACS. Think ahead, create the future, change the world.
Welcome back to the Innovation Forum. Thanks for being with us this evening, joining me as we explore what is happening now, what lies ahead, and the best ways for businesses to navigate a successful way forward are Doug Robinson, Managing Partner, Global Business Service, I should say, IBM ANZ, Rita Dar, National Head of Emerging Industries at Westpac's Business Bank, the ANZ Regional Director for Cloud Protection and Licensing Activity at Thales, Graham Piper, and from Telstra, the General Manager of Threat and Intelligence, Chris Moen. Thank you all very much for being with us, of course. Now we get to talk about some fun stuff. We get to look into the crystal ball and start throwing around the question of what things are going to be like in 5 to 10 years in your neck of the woods. Rita, I might start with you. Emerging businesses. Emerging businesses, what do you think, 5 to 10 years?
So I love future casting. And, you know, we put our minds to this probably at the beginning of the year when we were working on our research report on emerging industries. And I guess the best way we could think about this was look at all the businesses we've talked to. So we've been in the market working with, you know, startups in the startup ecosystem across the country for about 2.5 years now. And we've spoken to well over 300 companies. And when I look at that kind of list of companies, it covers every industry vertical there is. And when I look at the age of a lot of these emerging businesses, it kind of reflects the age of our startup ecosystem, which is about 5-6 years old. So a lot of our companies are between 1 to 5 year old. And, you know, we all know overnight successes take about 10 years to kind of get there. So, you know, when we think about a 5 to 10 year time frame, it's actually a good time frame for these companies to mature and start making impact or becoming known in their various industries. So I'm incredibly optimistic when I reflect on those companies, because every one of them is, you know, focusing on their industry and focusing on the problems in their industry and trying to fix those problems. And some of those problems are, you know, from our perspective, it may seem fairly mundane. It's getting two systems that, you know, share data or information to automatically reconcile, you know, to the very profound issues. You know, it's about helping us source food sustainably. It's about, you know, helping us transition to a renewable kind of energy future or electrifying transportation. So stepping back and looking at that, you know, in 5 to 10 years' time, I feel that, you know, these companies will gain traction, and these companies, and what we should see across all industries is tangible progress across, you know, industries, fixing some of the key issues that we've all sort of been living with, and, you know, businesses operating in those industries have been living with. So yeah. I see a very bright future, and if I had to, you know, put it down to a slogan, and we did in the report, it's a clean and connected future, and that's what we are working towards.
Yeah, it sounds like in 5 to 10 years we you know, we'll be working very closely with businesses that we haven't even heard of now. That's an exciting thought as well. Chris, I might move over to you, of course, you know, Manager of Threat and Intelligence at Telstra. What do you look at when it comes to a 5 to 10 year, exactly, 5 to 10 year period? I mean, what do you think? Do you think immediately Jason Bourne type of stuff, or is it, you know, what are we thinking?
I don't see it that way. So what I see is I take Rita's one and I take cottage industries, because that connected, clean future is where everybody has the same opportunities. So we're going to move from manual workers to knowledge workers. We've got some amazing brains in this country. We won Nobel Prizes. We've got some brilliant pieces that are being pushed all across the world. But you can do it from home, or you can do it from the bus, or you can do it from your favourite coffee shop. I mean, Harry Potter was written in a coffee shop, yeah? Why not be able to do that anywhere and to take Rita's piece and join those people together anytime, anywhere, as a collective? So you can have virtual organisations. And the good and bad part of that is virtual organisations can be good or bad, obviously, from there. And my job is to hopefully avoid people going to the dark side, because that's bad, obviously. But we want to move them back into Rita's bit and actually make them part of an economy that's really, really good for the community. And these rural communities we've got out in Australia, we've got some brilliant minds out there, but we can connect them now to work on projects all over the place, all over the world, at any time, because we're in a wonderful part of the world. Why would you want to move from somewhere like Manly to a city? Why would you want to come on the bus every day? Stick with that absolutely brilliant idea of I can work with where I want to and how I want to. If it's a surfboard off the shore of Manly Beach, why the heck not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so interesting point there about finding the people that are straying the wrong way and getting them back on track, certainly. Doug, over to you now. What do you think the next wave of social good looks like through a lens of technological development?
Of social good? So, yeah, see a couple things. So we've seen one example emerge of Plastic Bank recently. So this was a use of blockchain technology, and it was somebody who was trying to figure out how to solve the plastic issues in oceans. And the philosophy was if I could stop it at the source, I could help in that. But then how would I stop it at the source? So he was very clever. He came up with this idea that if I could get people to bring plastics from, open areas to a bank and deposit it in exchange for currency, cooking oil, something like that, could I take, impoverished nations and create an industry out of something and solve a problem at the same time? Wow. So it's kind of interesting. And somebody saw blockchain technology and was able to connect, both kind of how to create work and how to deal with an environmental problem and come up with that. So I think those sort of solutions are in front of us. Yeah. And it's up to the imagination for those to come out.
That's a wonderful idea there, and such a kind of a great way to talk about social change coming through technology. I do feel a bit like a downer when I keep coming back to the idea that there's got to be risk and consequences for this. Graham, what do you think when we talk about that? Do you see this enormous change that the business world is going through as having unintended consequences?
I think, look, risk is part of everything that we do every day, We have to look both ways when we cross the road.
Sure.
So whatever happens in the future, there will always be an element of risk. But what we've got to be able to do is to prepare as much as we can do by using the new data sets that AI and the likes are actually going to generate for us to make better informed decisions, okay? So I think from that perspective, yes, there's always going to be a bad guy out there, but let's hope that there's more good guys out there to combat that bad guy.
Yeah, well, what if the bad guy is becoming a super villain because of the access to all of this fantastic data and all of these places? Chris, is that a possibility here? Are the risks going to be exponentially growing?
So we talk about scale and pace. So scale and pace piece is that in the good old days, it wasn't possible to connect with everyone in the world by a click of a button. And the pace is it's a click of the button to be able to do that now. So if I want to check online, I can click a button and find that one now. The criminal element have the same ability. So the spam email that you see in your inbox is the ransomware that gets to your computers. It can go at a scale and pace that was unprecedented in human history. It just wasn't possible beforehand. There wasn't enough mailing bags to send this sort of stuff out beforehand. You can't knock on that many people's doors. But now we're all interconnected and we're connected 24/7. So that one click of a mouse button can get to millions or billions of connected devices almost instantaneously. So yes, there is always a capability of doing this one here. But fortunately, I've got some very bright people around me. And going back to the piece about the interconnected planet, we've got a lot of people that want to do social good and they want to do things for the right reason, not for the wrong reason. And if we can get people to change their minds and realise they can actually help the planet, so the brilliant piece about the plastic, right?
Sure.
And taking that out of our oceans, how phenomenal would that be if somebody took that element of, instead of taking money from other people, they help people get money or just change the planet to be a better place.
Yes, of course. Look, we want to see that. There are always going to be bad guys. Hopefully there are going to be more good guys than bad guys. I mean, when we talk about the cybersecurity space in Australia, do you think that that in itself is its own area for opportunity? Because these businesses need protecting, and Australia is a great place to grow the sorts of protections that are around there.
So there's some brilliant innovative minds here in Australia. There's the Australian government's put together something called Cyber, which has allowed small businesses to come together and actually move into larger communities as well. We've got companies like Atlassian, that were a software company, digital company online. We've got security companies. There's a great one in Australia called Pen 10. Small company, government focused, is now moving into commercial markets. We've just got to find those nuggets of pure gold and push them out to the world. They exist here. We've got some absolutely brilliant pieces. If I look to Doug and talk about agriculture here, how do we make safe agriculture? How do we stop that? How do we make sure that the food coming from that farm to my house is safe? We look at companies to make sure that that is safe and secure to do that one. And I'll be reaching out to people like Doug to help that. Doug?
Food, thanks for the segue. Food trust is an interesting one. So this is a piece of work that we've been doing around paddock to plate for quite a while. And so it is about looking at the supply chain of whether it be beef or any type of food, to look at that safety aspect. But the other thing that's changing is the social aspect of it. So we've done a piece of work recently here where we not only are tracking the beef and the origin of it, but as it gets to the end user, they can actually scan and see where it came from. So now it becomes not only social from an eating perspective, but it also becomes a marketing tool. So if you're trying to get verified Australian beef in China, for example, you're actually not only making it safe, but you're actually changing the kind of the social patterns and the status of saying this is actually real Australian beef. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing to talk about that as an opportunity for people who really want to know this, you know, the social good, the kind of the environmental impact of their food. And yet, when we talk about technological advancements, so often the comments on social media are all negative, and caution kind of abounds with this sort of stuff. Do you think that there's, you know, I guess the question is, do you think that too much data and crucial information is likely to be being held by too few? What do you think?
So I'll kick off this one because it's a fun one for me.
Okay.
It's not. The problem is we've become our own data sources. We hold our own information. The companies want that piece. We're giving away our information almost daily. So you go to coffee shops, and in some cases you can get, when you're ordering your coffee cart, they're taking your picture to work out who ordered which particular latte you've got. We're giving this information away, and these different pools are forming in different places. So we know about the Facebooks, we know about the Googles, we know about the Yahoos, we know about the big businesses that store this information. We don't know about the small businesses that are stacking this time and time again and just storing it in unsecure places because they don't know it's a bad thing to do. They just don't have that element.
It's a big responsibility, isn't it? Do you think it's one that the businesses are kind of are aware enough of?
I think they are, and it depends on kind of what scale of business as well. Yeah. But I think the complexity is going to increase. You know, like you're asking what the future is as well. Yes. And I think this is it kind of brings them together. You just got comfortable with cloud, so that's all going to change, right? We love cloud, so there's going to be lots of cloud. So it's going to be a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment in the future. And you can think about then what does the security implications of that. So the complexity is going to continue to grow. And I think both as you grow that complexity, it opens up opportunities, but with it, you're going to have this scale of security around that to think about what that looks like in the future.
Oh, fantastic. There you go. So much to think about. We are going to go to a short break now. When we come back, we'll be asking some big questions about what we need to do to safeguard our security as we advance. See you after the break.
This program proudly supported by ACS. Think ahead, create the future, change the world.
The Innovation Forum, proudly brought to you by IBM. Let's put smart to work.
Welcome back to the Innovation Forum. We are discussing all aspects of business innovation as we look to the future. One of the biggest challenges facing companies, big and small, as well as each and every individual out there, is data and how we protect it. Now, Graham, I might start with you here. It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of countries around the world have brought in, strict regulations, particularly talking about Europe here when it comes to their requirements such as GDPR. Do you think that it's something that we ought to be thinking about more on an international scale as well as here in Australia as to how we regulate for this new world we're creating?
So I think GDPR is a great example, right? And I think if we look at that in its entirety right now, there's a lot of aspects to that regulation. There's a lot of aspects as well which are actually for the first time in the favour of the consumer. You can now actually go to an organisation and say, delete my data, right? And they are obliged in law to actually delete that information. So I think when we look at multi-jurisdictional sort of compliance, it's difficult, right? Because you can't have one regulation that's a blanket for everybody. But what you can do is you can have elements of good in each of your compliance regulations. And the OAIC made their changes to the privacy principles last year for notifiable breach notification here locally. And that's had a really, really great impact in basically allowing organizations the ability to say, look, yes, we have had a breach, whereas before it was all shuffled under the carpet and hidden away. And then seeking the guidance and the advice and learning from their peers as to how can we combat this in the future.
Yeah, regulation, it's a huge and international issue, of course. Look, I kind of want to open things up a little bit and talk about the biggest thing in your area that you focus on that you'd like to perhaps get answered. It's a difficult question. Some of the biggest things that are happening and kind of wrapping up the thoughts here. Doug, what do you think?
So one of the challenges I've got is we've got this amazing IBM research group and very, very smart people that are coming up with the next technology. So quantum computing is one. I wouldn't sit here and try to describe quantum computing, but the challenge that comes from the labs to us is you're going to have this amazing computing power in the future. What can you do with it? So the challenge is how do we come up with industry problems that we can't solve with the computing power that we have today that we could in the future. So if you take airline disruptions and you go a weather disruption, to replan an airline is actually really difficult because you've got fuel, you got aircraft, you got crews, you got catering, you got all of the components on it. And so to be able to do a complex replan like that in a very, very short period of time, you can imagine the industry change. So the challenges that we've got is we're looking at the technologies that come at us that we don't necessarily know what problems they're going to solve. And that's where we need to translate.
There's certainly some difficulties involved in that. So we're hearing a little bit about regulation, about quantum computing. Rita, what about in your neck of the woods, emerging businesses? What do you think the big kind of question that we need to be looking at right now is?
So look, it's interesting. I mean, when you look at the tech startup ecosystem in Australia, I go back to my point. It's young. It's 5 years old, and and this is not to say we haven't had technology companies. This is how the ecosystem has organised itself with co-working spaces, venture capital industry going through a rebirth. And, the combination of those things kind of creating a critical mass of businesses, but they're still young. So I guess we all have to do our bit as large corporations to make sure we look after them well. And that is really the reason why my division was formed about 2.5 years ago, was to really look at and understand what are the emerging industries, who are the businesses driving it, and what we as a major business bank need to do differently to help these businesses. And as we've worked with that ecosystem, one of the obvious challenges is around for any business in Australia is access to capital. And there seems to be, two sort of areas where there's a gap. It's difficult to find capital to start, and there's difficult to find capital to scale. And, for a lot of these companies, one of the assumptions, and which holds true, especially in the early stages, is equity is going to be a key part of the answer. So we definitely need more depth to come about in our equity markets, and for, people who hold this capital to start getting interested in these sectors, in these companies, and actively start looking at investing, the high net worth individuals writing the small checks to get, these big ideas off the ground. You kind of need that. But also, I mean, from a banking perspective, the big work that we've been doing is we were one of the first major bank to have a risk appetite to lend to companies in that sector. And for 2.5 years, we've been working closely with them on a test and learn basis to progress this piece of work. And, down that track, I guess what we've learned is it is possible, for companies at a certain stage to access debt as a way to complement their equity, extend their operating runway, and be set up to scale in a different way. Yeah. So the big problem we are solving is really how best to support these companies by adapting our services. And it's a call out to all the other sort of large established companies to do exactly the same.
Absolutely. And there are plenty of them, of course. Chris, to finish with you, I mean, it's a difficult task with a minute or two left in the can, but what do you think when you look at this area?
Easy. So for me, this is a team sport. So cybersecurity, cyber safety, working together is actually a team sport. We need to bring as many diversity of thinking into this conversation and change it. Because if we work together as a group, as a team, we'll be able to stop people going to the dark side, make sure that safety is front of mind, and actually enhance and grow that capability we have here in Australia by working together. The country's used to working in sports, yeah? Why not just bring that and harness that in the business world? Same thing. We're not competing against each other, we're working together to make each other safe. Because once we've got a safe landscape, we've got an economically viable one to do that one, which will be the envy of the world.
Fantastic. Such a great way to leave it. We are pretty much out of time, but finally, a big thank you to our panellists this evening on the Innovation Forum. Doug Robinson, Managing Partner, Global Business Services at IBM. The National Head of Emerging Industries at Westpac's Business Bank, Rita Dar. Regional Director for Cloud Protecting and Licensing Activity at Thales, Graham Piper. And from Telstra, the General Manager of Threat and Intelligence, Chris Mohan. Thank you very much. Up next is Paul Murray. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.